Hello and welcome to another video. This one is going to be on how I Sub D modeled this steering wheel. I'm using Alias Surface 2022 and I'm using my own preference set. So yours might look a little different, especially here in the shelves. And then if you look down here, I added so you can see what keys I pressed. And I have a bunch of my hotkeys set up. So if you ever see something and it doesn't work for you, you can go to my website and download that preference set. And you could also go to my website and buy this steering wheel, which will obviously help my channel, and all that. So all the links will be in the description. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what Sub D modeling is and how it's different to polygon modeling, because a lot of people, they'll look at Sub D modeling, right? Especially when you look at it like in box mode down here, and they'll be like, oh, okay, that's a polygon modeling. But there's a lot of key differences, and one of them, and the most important one, is that the underlying data is actually surface data. It isn't like further subdivided polygons. So that means that once we actually finish sculpting this model, when we convert it to Nurbs, we can start adding all these like sort of like openings, and we could add like different tools using Alias, like these stitches, and it's not gonna change the continuity of this surface, right? Because that's something I see a lot, is that people, because they're coming from a world of polygon modeling, or maybe you see online how a certain person modeled something, you'll add the cut lines in with the cage or with the polys, but with Sub D modeling, you can remember that we have the opportunity to cut whatever we want without actually changing the like surface topology, right? So the reason why I chose the steering wheel is because it's a very organic shape, and it's almost more difficult to model this in Nurbs, especially when we're talking about these sorts of like transitions. So Sub D is actually becoming quite the useful tool inside of the modeling industry. I don't know if people would use this in the end result, but I think that especially for something like that, like steering wheels or like seats, things that are very organic and they're either going to be very wrapped in leather or used with very soft textures. It's kind of it's definitely a much quicker workflow. So in this video, I'm gonna show you guys how I modeled this, and also even before that, because if you look at the Sub D and you see the box modeling, you might say to yourself, you know what, this is exactly like polygon modeling, and to a certain extent, it is in the sense of like this sort of cage theory. And so if you have a preference like to use Blender, or maybe you have a model that you want to import and then you want to see, I kind of want to show that first so that you guys can start implementing the models you already made with different polygon softwares. And then that way you can see one of the key differences in terms of the math, and then also how you could quickly go back and forth, which is also another powerful tool, because the subdivision tools, which are here in the tab, these are all great, but there's a couple of things that are missing that haven't been implemented yet inside of this sort of modeling theory, because it's a very new form of modeling. But so you might like another software solution for that. So I want to show that first. So let's say that you have something already created in Alias and you want to export it, right? You go to File, Export, and then you go Active as Sub D, and then you're going to choose OBJ. And then that's going to make it into this like poly model that you could put into any 3D software. In Blender, we're just going to go to File, Import, OBJ. And the important thing to remember is there on the right side where it says Transform, make sure your up is Z and forward is going to be -X. So then you press Import. And then now we have this like poly version of our Sub D model. So now that it's Blender, I kind of want to showcase a little bit about the underlying math, right? So if I quickly go into my modifiers and I add a subdivided modifier, it really starts looking like the Nurb model, right? And it's almost one-to-one perfect, but there is little key differences, right? But here you can actually see that when you subdivide something, it just makes further polygons. And then once I shade smooth it, it basically averages out the normals. And now it's looking a lot like the Nurb or the Sub D version of it. But obviously, like I said before, there's a lot of differences. Like one of the things that isn't available yet inside of Alias is subdividing that cage model, right? Because a lot of times you want to add detail. So you kind of want to add like a global amount of like polys, right? So inside of Blender, I'm going to apply my subdivision by clicking here. And then that's going to make my actual cage into this subdivided polygon model, right? And so now I want to take that and transfer it to Alias. So the first thing I got to do is just make sure that it's only the model. So delete all the lights and all that. And then when you select the model, you go to a file export and then OBJ. And then remember that in the transform to make Z up and negative X forward again when you're also saving it out. Then to bring it back into Alias, remember to make your own layer and then select it. And because it's always going to go into whatever layer you're at, and go to File, Import, and then down here you'll find the Sub D, and then find that OBJ wherever you saved it. And then once you open it, it's going to go back into your Sub D with that new cage that's further subdivided. So here you can see that there's a lot of like little differences between Sub D and like traditional subdivision inside of polys. But the cage is still there and we could start adding more details to it, right? Like if I kind of move the CVs and get them closer together, and so I could add maybe a little more sharpness here and there. So that's one way to transfer back and forth and make your life a lot easier. So now we officially start actually modeling this thing inside of Alias, right? So your subdivision, you're going to find it here on your palettes. And here you're going to find the primitives, and we're going to start with a cylinder. Technically, you could start with a torus, but I decided to kind of like to showcase a little bit. We're going to start with a cylinder. So the first thing we're going to do is scale it non-proportionally, and then I'm going to press tab up here, and I'm going to type 0.4, 4, and 4. And remember, it's supposed to be set to relative. And now I'm just going to move my steering wheel a little bit higher up above the ground plane so the shadow looks a little more natural and doesn't cut through when I'm shading it. And now we have the bases of the outer rim of our wheel. And if I activate the CVs and I just grab them and move them around, just like you would inside of a polygon modeler or when you're even doing like a regular surface, and I could even select the holes and move that around. But inside of Sub D modeling, it's better to use the tools that were made for it. So here under pick, you could select the different edges under this sub menu. So just there's the edge, and then when you click on it, now you can select the edges and move them around. And if you want to select the whole loop, you go into this tab right here, and then you click on here, and it selects the whole loop. And to quickly select between like 2 points, you could hold down Shift, and if you press the middle mouse button, it's gonna connect everything that's between those 2 points or those 2 edges. And now to move them around, I use the Transform CV tool, and then when you hit spacebar, this menu is gonna pop up. And really the only ones I use are the normal based movements and also the ones that are based off the edges, right? Because most of the time, like I've said in many videos, I'm always basing my modeling off what's already there. So I actually have this hotkeyed up to Z and Shift C with my preference set because it's so common for me just to move the CVs around. And if you want to see it in box mode, you just click down here and then you can see the cage that you're actually developing. And so now we're actually going to start moving things around and adding more details. So I actually have my Sub D tools here, and then that way I can select the whole edge loops. And then I'm going to extrude these. So the extrude tool is right here. And if you see, there's this little gimbal, and it's right now it's based off the normal, which is good. But if you want to change it to more of a global extrude, just click there. But for this one, we're going to keep it at normal, and then we're going to push it down. And that is going to give us the first sidewall of our steering wheel. And now we want to connect the bottom edges. So I'm going to select both of the loops again. And now I'm going to use the bridge tool to bridge between those 2 loops and close this up and make it into a torus, which is, already in our standard primitives. But this way you could kind of see the different tools and kind of get used to these different little concepts. So now we could actually move the CVs around to make the steering wheel a little flatter. And I want to make the sides flatter, but I want to move them at the same time. So I'm going to activate the Symmetric Modeling tool, and that's under Object Edit. And then you click there in Symmetric Modeling. And now it lets us move both sides at the same time. So now I want to add a surface that bridges between both sides. So the first thing I'm going to do is bevel the edge of the steering wheel. So first I'm going to select that edge loop, and then I'm going to find the bevel tool under subdivision and then bevel. And that's an extremely powerful tool, and I think a lot of you already know those concepts. So you do that, and then it gives us another set of like faces in between them, right? And I'm going to try to see what thickness I want. And from there, I'm gonna move it around and try to get a better, like, a turning radius of the edges. And now I'm gonna go into box modeling, and I wanna get rid of the face that's right there in between, right? So I'm just gonna select that face and select the other side and then press delete. And actually, I don't think you need to select it when you're in mirrored mode. It just kind of does it automatically. And now I'm gonna select these openings, and then I'm gonna use my bridge tool to make a surface between both of them. This is one of the powerful aspects of Sub D modeling. You could sort of do these really big movements and changes, and it's fairly quick and you get a result really quickly, right? So now that I have them bridged, if I shade them up, I'm using hardware shade here, and it's just hotkeyed up to my H tool. We can see that it's making the connections we want, but it's way too round. So I want to add more control there, right? By adding more edges. So there's multiple ways of doing that. So I usually just use the insert tool, but it kind of confuses Alias because there's no like middle cut, and it's kind of trying to figure out how to do both of them at the same time. So another quick way of like sort of doing that is by using the cut tool. So the cut tool is right here, and then you just make a line straight through it, and then that's gonna give us more control over the edges, right? So then you just press enter, and then there you go. And I would love if this cut tool can actually get snapped into the grid or snapped into other things, but that's not the case just yet. Then I'm gonna add 2 more cuts to start developing the center of my wheel. So I'm gonna cut here, and then I'm gonna do another cut right here. And now I'm gonna select these CVs, and I'm gonna start moving them up. And as you see, sometimes when I select it, nothing happens, but that's more of an error with Alias's mirror. So a lot of times you'll see that I'm moving stuff around, and it's like right now, but I'm sure that will get fixed in later versions. Remember, right now I'm using Alias Surface 2022. So now I'm just kind of getting these CVs, and then I'm starting to make the center of my steering wheel. And this again showcases the power of Sub D modeling in the design workflow, right? Because we can make these really big changes and start adding volumes very quickly. And in more traditional Nurb modeling, that would have taken a long time, especially when we're talking about an organic form like that. So here there's a good place to kind of showcase what the planarized tool does. And basically like let's say these 2 edges, I want to make them straight, and obviously you could use even multiple edges just to make them into straight lines. So how this tool works is you have to go to whatever angle you want it to be straight, and then you hit the planarized tool, which is down here, and then that makes them straight on that view. And this is very powerful when we're doing a lot of like, refinement of the CVs. And now I'm going to grab this face and move it out. And then I'm going to grab the back face and move it out. And I'm just putting more volume into the center of my steering wheel by moving all these different control vertices. And now, like, let's say a lot of times you might want to just eliminate an edge, right? So that's very possible. You just select the loop and then the other loop, and then you just delete. And then that eliminates that. And many times a lot of people use that to, straighten out their edges. And now I'm going to grab these corners, and then I'm going to bevel them. And now that's going to make my steering wheel a lot more like squared up, right? So here I'm actually going to start doing some retopology. So the first thing I'm going to do is eliminate these surfaces, because I want to add more edges to the middle while keeping my arms 4-sided. So the first thing I do is insert edges so that I have an edge to connect to the arm, right? So I'm going to insert in the front and the back, and then I'm going to use the bridge tool to merge between them. So I'm going to select the edges, merge between them, and then I'm going to do the same thing all the way around. And once I'm done with that, that's going to leave a hole right down the middle. So I'm going to use the fill hole command. So this is how I can quickly add more details to the middle while keeping the arms 4-sided. So if you notice, we actually lost symmetry. So to get it back, I need to make sure that it's equal on both sides. So first I'm just going to cut it down the middle, and then I'm going to delete one side of the model. And a lot of times the symmetry tool kind of messes up. So a lot of people, they'll just model the whole thing using a layer and then with symmetry. And then the only problem with that is that you'll get a little bit of a widow's peak, but then obviously towards the end of the project, you'll just merge them all together, right? You duplicate it from one side to the other, and then you use your weld tool, click on all of those red edges, and then you'll have a nice symmetrical model. And when you apply the symmetry tool again, you'll be able to model it. Here I'm just doing some typical CV manipulations, and if you guys are still listening, remember to subscribe to my channel because it helps out. If you're ever inserting and you notice that on one side it doesn't go all the way through the loop, try to touch the other side, and then if it has a cleaner loop, you're more likely to get a nice clean insert. So to do the first part breakup, I'm going to use my bevel tool, which is hotkeyed up to Alt B in my preference set. And then inside of that bevel, I'm going to insert another edge loop. And then I'm going to get that edge loop and push it in so that I can get a nice little crease, and it kind of like wraps around really nice. Then since it's already selected, I'm going to use my Unweld tool to kind of separate it. Then after I do the same thing on the back, I can separate them and change out the materials. From here, it's looking a lot more like my final model, and I'm just adding more and more CVs. And I hope you guys notice that I'm just slowly building everything up, right? And it's slowly starting getting more form and shape. And then this is why in the end result becomes really clean, because I kind of like do the bigger parts first, and then I, add more details to the curvature of the form, but obviously this is more my own way of modeling. And for that metal frame around the horn, I just did the same thing I did with the outer steering wheel, where I just beveled it, inserted a loop, and then I unwelded them. And I wanted a tighter core around my frame, so I just got those edges and beveled them again, and that gave me a nice sharp corner there. And once you're happy with the Sub D model, we're going to convert it to a Nurb model to help with all the different tools inside of Alias. So to find it in the palette under surfaces, there's a tool called Surface from Subdivision. And that's going to convert the object from subdivision to a Nurb object. And even though the data is the same, it's when it's in Sub D mode, a lot of the tools inside of Alias aren't really compatible with it just yet. So it's a lot easier just to save out your Sub D cage and put in its own layer. And then you have the Nurb model, and this is the model we were going to use to actually add all of the different Alias tools. So the first tool I'm going to use is the panel gap tool. And this is a great tool to kind of make a parting line, but that's a little more detailed and obviously has a lot more control over the radiuses and all that. So to find it, you're going to go under surfaces, and under world edges, you're going to find the panel gap tool. Which has a lot of options, but that's because it does a lot. So the first thing we're going to do is change the primary section type to curvature, tangent offset. And there we could change the distance of the tangent between the fillet. And then with the gap distance, I'm going to go 0. And then I'm going to click on chain select so that it selects all of my new curve on surface, which was actually just based off a circle that I squared up a little bit. And then if you see those arrows, I'm going to make sure the arrows are pointing inside and then out. And then once I click enter, it actually gives us this nice little sort of panel gap. And the only problem with this tool is that once you're done with it, you're going to have to untrim and divide and then regroup just to kind of like change it to 2 different parts. But it's a very powerful tool. So now I want to add some stitches along the outer edge of the steering wheel. So first I'm going to add a curve and project it so I can have a curve on surface to actually put it in. And then I'm going to activate my tool, which is under the Surfaces tab, and it's called Stitch and Seam. And the seam type is going to be French, and then the seam offset, from the distance between the middle and where the seam starts. And for the stitch length, I'm going to go down to 2, which later I find is a little too small. But, remember to just play around with the settings, and, maybe some certain things look a little better, especially when we're like, if you change the bulge size or eliminate it, it really depends if it's very soft or if it's very hard leather. It really helps put some detail into the model. So once you actually select it, you're going to see that arrow. Make sure it's pointing out. And then when you click enter, it's going to actually develop all this stitch and seam. And the easiest way I found to sort of like shade it is first I shade all of it the stitch color, because all the stitches are like shells. And then I select just the surfaces, which is French seam. And then I paint those black. And then that way I don't have to individually color every single stitch. And now we have a nice little detail. And that's how I modeled this steering wheel. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I'm trying to be a little quicker with them because I know a lot of times I could be long-winded. So, I know I cut up a lot of the, different stuff because, I don't want you guys to be, wasting your time just seeing me move a CV back and forth, So I try to compress everything a little more. And hopefully this is a little easier for you guys. So yeah, let me know if you guys like the new shorter format, even though this is still a long video. I swear I cut it back like from an hour to 20 minutes. So anyways, yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. And remember, if you want this model, you could buy it in my shop. Links are in the description. Bye-bye.